Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, the tree cover in D.C. and Baltimore is thinning. What's that mean for our air, water, and climate and quality of life? Cheryl Kollin of American Forests and Guy Hager of the Parks and People Foundation join us. Pulitzer Prize winner Hedrick Smith calls Beth Schulman's The Betrayal of Work must-reading about the future of the American economy and society. Beth Schulman's here to explain her view that low-wage jobs are failing 30 million Americans and their families. Superbugs, bacterial infections resistant to most, if not all, antibiotics. They're here and they're spreading, says University of Maryland epidemiologist Mary Claire Roghmann. And poets, Lisa Pegram witnesses evictions, Adriane Harjo remembers a home of pain and fleeting sacred moments, and Sami Miranda's soft words sing the pain of waiting. While folk guitarist Nick Annis laments, "Hey love, time to go." Hi, and welcome to the forum at the Coffee House, where we're talking about urban areas and trees in the Baltimore, D.C. region. Trees that clean the air, absorb stormwater runoff, cool the asphalt jungle, and beautify. The city of Baltimore is losing trees at a rate of 110,000 a year. That's 110,000 trees per year, a net loss of 4% of the tree cover. The area around the District of Columbia has its own serious tree loss problem. Since 1973, the amount of densely forested land in the D.C. metro region has fallen from around 220,000 acres to fewer than 150,000 acres. Why are so many trees disappearing? And what's being done about it? Let's ask Cheryl Kollin. Cheryl directs the Urban Forestry Program for the D.C.-based nonprofit American Forests. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Mark.
Also joining us is Guy Hager, Director of Great Parks, Clean Streams, and Green Communities Project at Baltimore's Parks and People Foundation. Welcome, Guy, to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Mark.
Cheryl, let's start with you. Before we start throwing out a lot of numbers, tell us why tree loss matters in terms of the economy, in terms of the environment.
Trees are so important. They provide so many benefits, and we are looking at particularly the environmental benefits because recent research has been able to quantify the environmental benefits for slowing down stormwater runoff, improving air quality, water quality, cooling our atmosphere and our urban heat islands. So we know that trees provide so many wonderful environmental benefits, and now for the first time we're able to actually quantify those benefits.
And we've been able to quantify also some losses, including the number of trees lost to Baltimore each year. It seems like a very large number, Guy. What is happening in Baltimore? Why this 110,000 tree loss per year?
Well, Mark, first of all, this is the first study in the country that the U.S. Forest Service has conducted like this. There's no comparable data in other cities in terms of specific numbers, so we don't know how it compares, but we think it's probably about average. And this includes all public and private trees, and most of our cities focus their resources on public trees, those along the streets and in parks, but most of the trees, about 80 to 85% of them, are in private space, in industry, commercial areas, institutional areas, people's private homes or private property. So those are where the majority of the trees are, and we don't know exactly what's happening with them.
Trees have a varied life expectancy, I gather. And in Baltimore, the average life expectancy is what, about 15 years for trees, but it could be as few as 7, as many as 80 years?
Yeah, it ranges greatly depending on where the tree is. And of course, the closer you get down to the downtown area, where you have a lot of cars, a lot of pollution, limited light, limited water, you have a less lifespan for your trees. So the larger trees that are in people's backyards, primarily in Baltimore, as you showed in that picture earlier, are up in the northern tier. And most of those are 70 to 80 years old. They're also in danger because they're going to be dying soon. And the question will be, will they be replaced?
And I should just mention that all over the country we're seeing some trends of tree loss, tree canopy loss, anywhere from 30 to even greater, 30% tree canopy cover. We're seeing that anywhere east of the Mississippi and also in the Pacific Northwest. So we're seeing that also in the Washington-Baltimore area, 32% tree loss.
So, as far as you can tell, 110,000 trees lost is not necessarily out of the ordinary.
Really, obviously depends on the size of the city,
Sure.
but we're seeing these as national trends, and we're seeing that this tree loss, as I said, directly affects the environmental quality and important values that cities are losing because of that.
We're going to come back to that in a second.
Sure.
First, I want to look at the differences among trees a little bit. Some trees are more successful in urban areas in Baltimore than other trees. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's specific species that do better in urban areas than others, and this study showed what trees were doing well, what trees were in danger or dying off. So we need to...
Which ones are we, or should we not be planting, for instance? Or
Well, I don't think that's the question, because there's a right tree for the right place, but it's a question of where that place is. Along industrial areas and transportation routes, they're going to need trees that are very hardy, can take the fumes and the gases from automobiles and trucks, and take less care because
like
they're not maintained.
Red maples, white oaks?
Well, those are the ones that are doing very well in Baltimore City right now.
Mm-hmm. And the ones that aren't?
Well, one of the ones is Atlantis, which we consider an invasive, so we're actually sort of between in terms of whether we want those or not. But others, like dogwoods, we see a great deal of dogwoods dying off. That's a fungus problem here in the Mid-Atlantic area. So it's not just environmental conditions, it's other diseases, bugs, and other things that are affecting the trees.
In the D.C. area, the tree loss seems to be greater outside the Beltway than inside the Beltway. Why would that be?
That's right. We noticed in the studies, and particularly looking at the hot spots of tree canopy loss, that it is outside the Beltway, because those are the areas where there's the most urban development. And you can look at specific species or diseases, but we think probably one of the major impacts around the country is looking at urban development and not recognizing that connection between the tree canopy as a valuable ecological resource for our cities to provide clean air and water, and developing with trees in mind, actually integrating them into new development.
You've been conducting, not you personally, but your organization has been conducting studies around the country
Yes.
on tree loss.
Yes.
How are those studies conducted?
We have looked at about 40 different areas, regions, urban areas, cities, and metropolitan areas around the country. We use Landsat satellite imagery, and we use a computer technology called geographic information systems. When you combine this data layer with the image and being able to look at the reflectance of the tree canopy, then we can actually identify the different land cover types that are involved. So tree canopy, we also look at impervious surfaces. So that would be buildings, sidewalks, roads, and other vegetation, other land cover types. When you actually classify those then into different percentages, and then we use a program that American Forest developed called City Green, we can actually calculate then the ecological benefits, as I said, for stormwater runoff, air pollution, water quality, and then also attach an economic value to that.
Okay, let's talk about that for the D.C. area. What has your study shown in terms of the economic benefit that comes from heavily forested areas?
Well, let me talk actually first about the loss in tree canopy cover. As I mentioned, over the last 3 decades, Washington, D.C. metro area has lost 32% tree canopy cover. When we looked at that analysis for Washington, D.C., that translates into lost benefits for slowing down stormwater runoff. And without those trees, then the city has to build more infrastructure, which is very expensive. We actually valued that at $226 million for that 30-year time period. When you look at air quality, those trees cannot, the lost tree canopy cover cannot mitigate air pollution, and we calculated that value to be $1 million a year.
Now, is that simply the cost that would have had to have been spent in terms of filter systems, or does that also encompass all the health costs associated with dirty air?
Yes, it's all of that. Okay. So it's building the infrastructure, which is very expensive, and then it's also looking at the offset of health costs and hospital stays and all of that. So the economists have actually been able to tie an economic value to the properties that trees provide.
Now you say that there should be some comparison made by cities of treed areas and impervious surfaces, and that some balance should be struck. And you are proposing what kind of balance?
Well, what we're hoping to do is to encourage all communities to set a tree canopy goal for their individual community. American Forest will recommend general guidelines of 40% overall for forested areas east of the Mississippi and for the Pacific Northwest, recognizing that in your urban downtown areas you would probably have a 10% tree canopy cover, and then in the residential areas you would have 35%, and then in the treed suburban areas it could be as high as 50%. But it's really important for each community to set their own tree canopy goal, and then as communities develop, which they inevitably will, to really integrate those canopy goals into the planning process.
Now, if we looked at the D.C. area right now, we'll come back to Baltimore in a second. When we look at the D.C. area, it would be Bethesda, Falls Church, Vienna. These are well-heeled suburbs that tend to meet the criteria that you're describing. And as you go down the economic scale, it tends to be a much smaller percentage of treed areas. Isn't that right?
Well, I would say that the downtown urban centers have less tree canopy, and the more suburban areas have a greater tree canopy cover. But surprisingly, a lot of communities are not even meeting those minimums. And so we think that it's most important for people to know what they have, know what their tree canopy is, and then be able to set their goals and try and achieve that, both through planning mechanisms and replanting what they've lost and changing their tree ordinances. So there's a lot of public policy kinds of mechanisms that communities can get involved with to set their goals and then meet those targets.
And what are you doing in Baltimore, Guy?
Well, first of all, let me point out that in Baltimore, our studies have shown that tree canopy in our neighborhoods, our 272 neighborhoods, range from less than 1% to over 65%. So there's a lot of inequity, neighborhood by neighborhood, and a lot of it has to do with the older areas within the city, which the trees have been pushed out by urban development, primarily the automobile, which has taken a lot of the street trees away, and then the small neighborhood backyards that are part of row house development. So there's a lot of, as Cheryl says, replacement that has to occur that's been neglected for a long time. So we feel that setting these goals are very important. We're working with community groups. Parks and People Foundation is working with community groups throughout the city to help set and establish these goals, and also tie this directly with water quality. We're doing this in a special project called Watershed 263 right now, and we're looking forward to people really understanding the value of the trees, becoming greater stewards of that, and hoping to have their interests represented as investments are made in redevelopment of the city and making it greener. It's very clear that it's not just environmental benefits, but economic benefits that are derived from trees and green space in urban settings, and people want to be in those places.
We're about out of time. I want to make sure that your organization is parksandpeoplefoundation.org.
Yes.
People can reach you.
Right.
And AmericanForest.org.
That's correct. And people can look on our website to actually get an analysis of their particular community.
Excellent. Declining urban forests are both a warning sign that our living environment is growing unhealthy and a cause of that unhealthiness. Thanks to Guy Hager of the Parks and People Foundation and Cheryl Kollin of American Forest for joining me. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
In this house, there is silent pain and sacred moments, fleeting moments, just like fog seen by orange light down the little hill in the schoolyard, viewed through the small barred window above the kitchen sink, false security, fleeting moments, like the white-winged doves that don't yet know of my uncle or his Christmas dinner designs. He and I stand silently watching as the birds dip and dive to feed. He and I, a fleeting sacred moment. He's now in a room that was once mine, his once before that time. He with his false sense of security, 2 packs of Redmore cigarettes and a bottle of Jack Daniels, just to keep him company, all hidden behind his rarely open door. Fleeting moments. In a room where I kissed a girl, oh, we were not beautiful, not yet 14, but I kissed and touched her in ways I had desired, to be held by soft lips, by firm yet yielding hands, and she tried to mirror my moves. She and I laying in my bed, kissing and touching and wanting so much more out of life than the silent pain this house had to offer. She and I, a fleeting sacred moment. By the soft glow of nightlight, laying back, crying quietly, watching as my black fantail fish swam seamlessly through clear water. Another fleeting sacred moment. Oh, in this house, there is silent pain. With Catholic icon images tacked up on the wall near the sink, it's something obscene left over from white boarding schools that held impressionable Indian children in the grips of fear and fear of God, and held my grandparents still. Bibles in the living room, talks of charlatans like Hubbard, Baker, Tammy, Faye, over supper, under memories, melancholy for other supper meals shared together in the kitchen. But bickering and bitter words left a gnawing of absolute recognition. This house and I share silent pain and fleeting sacred moments.
Hi, and welcome to In Sickness and in Health at the Coffee House. We all get small skin inflammations from time to time, a scrape, a mosquito bite, shaving nick, or frayed cuticle. Slap on the antibiotic cream and all is fine, right? Well, maybe not. You may have a bacterial superbug, in which case most antibiotics would be useless. And that minor skin infection, if it spreads internally, the results may actually be fatal. The superbug's name is MRSA. Here to talk about MRSA, how it is spreading increasingly in the community, and how to fight it, is epidemiologist and infectious disease specialist Dr. Mary Claire Roghmann of the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Roghmann, to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
MRSA, what does that stand for? And
Well, it stands for methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. And Staph aureus is a very common bacteria that many of us carry in our skin. The term methicillin-resistant means that it is resistant to the most commonly used type of antibiotics.
it can be resistant to other antibiotics as well, but that name is just stuck for general resistance. Is that correct?
The type of organ, when we say MRSA, it means that it's resistant to that particular class of antibiotics. It actually doesn't tell you whether it's resistant to the other classes of antibiotics, which it may still be susceptible to.
Now, we've heard a lot about people in hospital getting a hospital bug, which is often, can be MRSA. But what about community-acquired MRSA, which is, you don't get it from hospital, you get it from being out and about in the world?
Well, there's a couple things to think about when we talk about whether something's community-acquired or not. Right now, still, most community-acquired MRSA are using the Centers for Disease Control guidelines, acquired in the hospital. But then they go on, the organism goes on to cause an infection later after a person has left the hospital. So actually, in actual fact, the organism was acquired in the hospital, and yet the infection manifests itself later. And that's what's known, sometimes known as community-acquired MRSA.
Now, if someone has been in hospital, and we all go to hospitals or clinics for all kinds of things, they can spread it to family members who have not been to hospital as well.
That is indeed true.
What is the danger? How much is it increasing now in the community?
Well, it's still uncommon in the community. Yeah. You are far more likely to get methicillin-resistant Staph aureus in the hospital than you are in the community, but it is increasing.
Okay. Well, we're going to have a look at some slides of what it looks like. Sometimes, I guess, it's so small that it doesn't look like much, but what are some of the characteristics of a staph skin infection, whether it's the antibiotic-resistant one or regular staph?
Yeah, the infections, from looking at an infection, I could not tell you whether it was due to a resistant form of Staph aureus, such as MRSA, or a susceptible type of Staph aureus, because the infections themselves look identical. Mm-hmm. Staph aureus causes, as you said, skin infections. Mm-hmm. The classic example would be a boil.
Mm-hmm. Or carbuncle?
Carbuncle is another term, yes.
But we can often get very small ones that we may brush off, use the antibiotic cream. What are the signs that we've got MRSA as opposed to the regular staph if we're just living our lives?
Well, before you've gone and seen a physician and gotten an antibiotic, you couldn't tell whether you have the resistant form or a susceptible form. If you go to a physician and you're prescribed an antibiotic of the type from the class called methicillin and the infection fails to go away, then that's one hint that you may have the resistant form, in which case you would need to go back and be prescribed a different type of antibiotic.
So usually our body would fight it off by itself. It's just we get into trouble when it's not going away. And what kind of drugs are there, last resort drugs? How, what happens if you really can't fight it off, or haven't we got to that yet?
Well, at this point, there have been a couple case reports, and I'm talking 1 or 2 case reports in the entire United States where there have been resistance to almost all the antibiotics. However, there's always been one residual antibiotic left that we've been able to use. I think the important point to stress, though, is that that's incredibly rare at this point, and we want to take steps so that that remains incredibly rare.
What steps?
Well, I think there's a number of different ways that you can approach preventing infections due to Staph aureus. As I mentioned, it's a bug that is found on many people's skin. It's estimated that about 1/3 of us would have Staph aureus on our skin at any time.
Just lurking around on our wrists or wherever?
We are, and that's not the only bacteria that's on our skin. There are many different types of bacteria all over our bodies. If you have the bacteria on your skin or in your throat, then you're at increased risk for developing an infection if there's a breakdown in the skin where the organism is. So, for example, if you cut yourself and Staph aureus is near the skin that was cut, then you're at risk for getting an infection from that cut due to Staph aureus. So we can prevent Staph aureus infections by, number 1, eliminating the organism from our skin. And then if we get an infection, we can reduce the risk of spreading it to others and getting it again by treating with antibiotics.
If it's on our skin, does it go away when we shower and use antibacterial soap, or how do we actually get rid of it?
Well, the favorite place that Staph aureus likes to live is the inside of the nose. Most of us probably don't shower there. And so it is actually very difficult to rid the skin of the bacteria, because it lives inside the nose and then it can spread out again onto the skin after we shower.
What about if it gets inside? Those are the much more dangerous cases, I suppose, when it's inside and you don't know what it's doing. And can you explain some of those symptoms and what can happen?
Staph aureus usually causes skin infections, and as the skin infections get bigger and bigger, there's a chance that it will spread into the bloodstream. When it spreads into the bloodstream, people tend to have have very high fevers, feel very weak and fatigued, and you would want to go to a hospital, not just to see your doctor, but you'd want to go to your hospital.
Is it very sudden?
No, it usually takes 5 to 7 days. It's unpredictable depending on how much of the organism got into, for example, a cut. But it doesn't usually occur extremely suddenly. It usually occurs over days.
And your fever may be up around 102 or something quite high?
Yes, very high.
And how would you be treated then?
Well, you would receive antibiotics, and they'd be given directly into the vein instead of taking them by mouth.
So you'd have to go to hospital for that?
Yes.
Yeah. in the cases, is the last resort drug that we use for MRSA, is that one of the antibiotics that cattle use? We've heard a lot about giving antibiotics to animals and then animals helping the resistance develop even further.
Well, the antibiotic there's a number of drugs that we can use, a number of antibiotics that we can use against MRSA. One of them is vancomycin, which we've used for a long period of time, decades, to treat these infections. That actually is not an antibiotic that we give to animals. In general, there's not been a link proved between giving antibiotics to animals for Staph aureus transmission.
Because they get it too, of course.
They do indeed get Staph aureus infections. The main link really appears to be the antibiotics that we take, and also the fact that Staph aureus is transmitted between people.
There has been a CDC report quite recently, actually, about athletes developing MRSA, staph and particular MRSA, because of using the same clothing. How easy is it to spread amongst family or people in close physical contact?
Oh, it's quite easy to spread. Skin-to-skin contact, I can think of an example of where it was spread among a wrestling team. Again, a lot of physical contact. It's not surprising that you would get spread of any Staph aureus, not just MRSA.
Right. How long does it live on surfaces?
It can live for days, if not weeks.
Oh, really? And then someone else touching that surface?
Right. The numbers probably decrease markedly with time. And so your chance of getting it is much greater through direct contact than through indirect contact. But yes, it can be recovered on surfaces a week later.
Right. What research is being done into this bug?
Well, there's a great deal of interest, obviously, in the field of antibiotic resistance as well as Staph aureus. Staph aureus is a bacteria that can cause serious infections, whether it's resistant to antibiotics or not. And we're obviously very interested in making sure that we have antibiotics that we can use in the future to treat these types of infections. Research is being done to try and reduce the transmission of Staph aureus from one person to the next. Research is being done to try and eliminate the colonization state, the presence of the bacteria on the skin and on the inside of the nose. And then research is being done to help develop new antibiotics so that we have greater options for treating organisms like MRSA.
What's in the pipeline in the way of new antibiotics? Because it takes a long time to develop and companies have been backing out of developing them.
It does.
I mean, is it a serious situation there?
There are a number of new antibiotics that will be treating Staph aureus. We have probably 2 or 3 in the pipeline. A number have just been approved, and we have linezolid as well as vancomycin on the market. We need to continue to develop new drugs and to develop drugs that use different mechanisms to kill these bugs than other antibiotics or the existing antibiotics.
The antibiotic last resort one you mentioned,
linezolid,
which is known as Zyvox. You don't want to take that unless you really have to for many reasons, including the cost, isn't it? Almost $1,000 for a week's supply.
I don't know the exact cost, but it's extremely expensive.
Yeah. It's not just the U.S. who has this problem, isn't it?
No.
Can you explain some places that have it worse, perhaps? Or?
Well, it's interesting. Europe has a considerable problem with methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, but then there's other areas that don't have as much of a problem. It's unclear exactly why. The Scandinavian countries, for example, have very little MRSA. They have been much more aggressive about preventing the spread of the organism within hospitals. And this may have had the subsequent effect of preventing spread in the community, because everyone, though everyone believes that it can be spread in the community, the sources of MRSA are people who have been in the hospital, who are then spreading it in the community.
So I suppose wash your hands tremendously, even more than you're doing now. And if one of our viewers gets a small infection that seems to be a little strange, not going away, get it seen to sooner rather than later, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. We've run out of time now, but a big thank you to Dr. Mary Claire Roghmann of the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Superbugs are here, they're spreading, and we need to be on guard against this alarming public health threat. I'm Cathy Kristiansen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
I saw two on my way home today. Times must be rough. Neighbors pass by and stop, flip with sanctimonious wrist and flared nostrils through tax files and splayed family albums with familiar wedding photos, themselves in the distant background. Audit inventory for the gossip report. Battered sofas and despairing coffee tables tilt on sprained ankles. Pigeons squat on heirloom lampshades. Soon, rats will lease hollows of a bed 6 cherished babies were conceived on, and the dresser drawer bassinet handed down between them. Ticker tape fanfare of birth certificates, love letters, grocery lists take wing on complacent breeze, suspend in comic strip billows midair above overturned kitchen table. Each place setting serves one frame of a dinner debate between validity, romance, and mundane. Nobody wins. A small child points, "Look, yard sale," misled by all the customers employing honed bargain basement strategy to scavenge, vultures tweezing memories like unruly chin hairs with thumb forefinger pincers, scouring somebody's everyday life for fixer-up treasure. Frame sketched of paradise here, tarnished gilded mirror there, whatever they can refurbish and later brag is a steal, tucked under an armpit, absconded to their safe home. Grimy shower curtains and stained mattresses blanch, caught undressed by unexpected company. It is a murder scene, a home violated, limbs sprawled, mouth gaping, stripped, raped, abandoned at a rush hour intersection. And they say D.C. is a renter's town.
Welcome to Work Life at the Coffee House. The great secret of America is that a vast new impoverished population has grown up in our midst. These are not Americans who have been excluded from the world of work. In fact, they make up the core of much of the new economy. These are words from The Betrayal of Work, hailed as a powerful book by Washington Post columnist E.J. Dionne and a must-read by Pulitzer Prize winner Hedrick Smith. I am so very pleased that Betrayal of Work author Beth Schulman is with us to discuss her view that low-wage jobs are failing 30 million Americans. Beth, welcome to the Coffee House.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, it seems like the economy's getting better. We're in a recovery mode. Prosperity is about to be restored. Is this problem of low-wage work about to go away as well?
Quite the contrary, Fred. In the tightest labor market in the late 90s, 1 out of every 4 Americans were in jobs that paid less than $8.70 an hour. And our economy has gotten worse, not better. So this is a problem that's growing, not shrinking.
But isn't the ultimate solution to poverty and to the working poor, isn't it a strong economy? Isn't the solution encouraging business investment, encouraging business growth and business health?
Oh, of course, we should encourage business growth and business health. That's a necessary ingredient to a very strong economy, but that's not enough. We need to invest in our workers. We need to invest in jobs that create the kinds of lifestyles that people can take care of themselves and their families. You know, the jobs of low-wage work are things that are so important to all of us. They're childcare workers and nursing home workers. They're janitors, they're hotel workers, they're security guards, they're pharmacy assistants. These are jobs in the mainstream of our economy and our lives, and we need to ensure that these jobs reward the workers in those jobs.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure that that we're all concerned about poverty and we're concerned about low-wage work, but the middle class hasn't had it so easy recently either. And and the middle class is, that's where most people are, and isn't really that what deserves most of our attention and most of our concern is the struggle that middle class workers face on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the reality is that the kinds of problems in the low-wage labor market, for instance, most low-wage jobs don't provide health insurance. They don't provide sick leave. People have less time to be with their families. Many of them don't provide pensions or time off. Those are the same kinds of problems that middle-class jobs are facing today. Many middle-class jobs, workers are paying more and more for their health insurance. Their pensions are being dissolved. Their jobs are being outsourced. So some of the very problems that need to be addressed in low-wage jobs are the very same problems in middle-income jobs. There's a commonality there that we as Americans need to face. We need to ensure that work provides the basics of a decent life for all Americans.
Mm-hmm. But now again, aren't most low-wage workers, aren't they basically kids that are getting pocket money while they're going to school? I mean, really, is that something that should occupy a lot of our concern and our attention? The burger flippers at McDonald's who, in a couple of years they'll be in college and all will be fine in their lives.
The reality is most low-wage workers are adults with family responsibilities just like the rest of us. They're high school educated, many have college credits, and still others have gone on through college. This is a workforce that's the mainstream workforce. Adults, family responsibilities, high school educated, and want the same kinds of things that all Americans want for themselves and their children.
But isn't it true that most of the low-wage workforce, they're basically people that didn't stick with high school, that they dropped out, and if people would just stick with, stay in high school, get their education, I mean, aren't those people pretty much insulated from the type of concerns that you're addressing here?
The problem is that the low-wage workers today are actually more educated than they were 20 years ago. These are not high school dropouts. These are high school educated, have college credits. These are Americans that have done everything America has asked. Stay in school, go out and work every day, every evening, do everything in terms of working hard. It's America that's failed them. They failed them in terms of not providing the basics of a decent life. You know, Fred, there was a tacit understanding. If you work hard in America, you can provide for yourself and your family. You get basic self-sufficiency. We have failed that, and we need to address that as a nation.
Okay. Again, if you work hard, and yeah, you might have to start at the bottom. You might have to start with a low-wage job, but isn't it true that if you work hard and you stick with it, that mobility itself, that there's upward mobility, there's this chance to succeed, and eventually the low-wage worker, yeah, maybe for a year or two they might struggle in a low-wage job, but if they do their job, they're going to pass on to the next phase and move into jobs that perhaps support a middle-class lifestyle.
If that were the truth, if low-wage jobs were a stepping stone to better jobs, then we wouldn't have the problem we have today. The reality is that these jobs are not stepping stones. In fact, they're like low-wage careers. People are stuck in these jobs. 2/3 of workers in low-wage jobs never make it to the median wage. So we've got a problem of workers in jobs that are valuable to every one of our lives, yet they can't make enough to support their families.
Well, let's say we want to do something about this. Don't we run right into the problem? The first thing we run into is globalization. Sure, there's low-wage jobs here, but look at China and elsewhere around the world where people work for 1/10 of what they work for here. That's what we're competing against. And so is it realistic to say that we could do something about low-wage work in this country when the world we're competing in is a world where jobs pay much, much less than what they pay in this country?
Well, most low-wage jobs aren't even in the global economy. If we look at low-wage jobs, we look at a janitor's job, if we look at a hotel worker, a child care worker, a nursing home worker, those are jobs that have to be done in the United States, They can't be shipped to China or any other country. So the global economy is not an excuse for doing anything about it. The other thing is that low-wage workers in the United States are worse off than low-wage workers in other industrialized countries. They've seen fit to ensure that the structure of their economy rewards work for all the workers in their country.
What are some of, where else?
France, Germany, Britain, the Netherlands, the Scandinavian countries, Italy, all of these have figured out a way to ensure that regardless of the job that's being done in their society, that workers can provide the basics. We haven't made that commitment as a society, and we need to do that.
So I imagine what they're doing in this country and what we hear at what they're doing in those countries and what we hear in this country as well is the solution to all this must be training, right? That if we could just make sure that we provide good training, that people can move out of these low-paid jobs, and that ultimately that's the solution?
Well, training is always important, and I think education is always important. No one would disagree with the fact that, having the opportunity for better education and training certainly helps you with your options. But if you look at where the jobs are growing in the United States, they're in these low-wage sectors. 5 out of the 10 fastest growing occupations are these low-wage jobs. And they're important jobs. We should ensure that these jobs
what are some of these jobs that are low-wage important jobs?
These are the workers that are taking care of our parents in nursing homes or as home health care aides. They're child care workers who every day educate and take care of children and prepare them to move on. They're pharmacy assistants that ensure that you have the proper drugs to be taking. There's security guards that ensure that we're safe every day. There are people who are janitors who clean up the offices we work in, and hotel workers. These are important jobs. These are jobs essential to our economy. This is the new service economy that is essential to every one of our lives. So we need to value those jobs and value the work in those jobs and reward them adequately.
Well, if we reward them adequately, certainly we would make life better for the people who have those jobs. But is it really going to make a difference to me, to you, to the rest of our country? It'll make a difference. We'll feel better, I suppose. But beyond that, it seems like there's so many other things that we need to do. Why the focus here?
It's so important to ensure that workers are rewarded. It has huge ramifications for their children. Their children have anything but equal opportunity to succeed. And these are the next generation of workers, of people who will be in our society and who we hope to be productive citizens. We need to ensure that they have a fair shake so that they can succeed. It has huge ramifications for the kind of democracy we are. We were built on kind of a shared sense of values and a future, and as we become more and more polarized, we split in two in terms of where we're going as in America. It has huge ramifications for our economy, for the kinds of communities we have.
What kind of economic ramifications?
It has huge economic ramifications. As we're competing in a global economy, we need to ensure that every citizen is as productive as they can. We need to invest in workers, not treat them as if they're disposable.
Well, I certainly, the goals are certainly admirable goals, but what about, it seems like some significant number of these jobs are people working for small employers who are struggling, and themselves who are marginal employers. And how do we expect employers who are barely hanging on as it is to be able to afford to pay higher wages?
First of all, the largest employer in terms of low-wage jobs is Walmart. It's the largest employer in the United States. So many of the employers are very large employers. Certainly with regard to small employers, we need to level the playing field. We need to pool resources so they can afford health insurance. Certainly we need to do that. But we look at the minimum wage today and it's $2 less in value than it was in 1968. We need to raise it. It's $5.15 an hour. That's less than $10,000 a year. We need to ensure that there's a level playing field, and we need to ensure that we don't go below such a low level that people can't afford the basics of a decent life.
Well, thank you, Beth Schulman, for this very important book. I must say that I could not put the book down once I started reading it. We in America pride ourselves on being a society that honors and rewards hard work. Yet, as the betrayal of work very powerfully shows, those among us who often work the hardest at some of the most important jobs are in fact rewarded the least. I'm Fred Feinstein, and this has been Work Life.
Soft words sing the pain of waiting. He sits, cup in hand, searching his memory for her, playing his 78s, hoping she will come on the path cleared by each scratchy bolero and dance with him. The way that dancing was meant to be, slow, where a man could know a woman's intentions just by how she placed her hand on his back. Her hand on his back, soothing him into the scent of his negrita, who wasn't very dark at all, but the color of wheat, trigueña, dolor. Dolor is the absence of her, so he listens.
It's the same 9 to 5, it's the clothes that you wear, the car that you drive, and the cut of your hair. It's paying your bills, it's the dollars, it's cents, it's that house on the hill with a white picket fence, and it's all background scenery. It is all background scenery. It's the road that you plan, it's starting to bend, the touch of a hand, the smile of a friend. Things that you know, but you just can't explain. It's love that you lost, it's the love that remains, and it's all background scenery. It is all background scenery. It's the price that you pay, the dreams that you chase, the crap in your way, the demons you face. It's a place that you stand when shove comes to push. It's that bird in your hand that's worth two in your bush, and it's all background scenery. It is all background scenery. It's the skin that you're in inside of my lip, in a kiss that begins the curve of your hip. It's a grip that you take, a slip of the tongue, the sound that you make when it's starting to come, and it's all yes, it is all. Oh, it is all background scenery. It's the whisper of death, your lover's first line, your mother's last breath, your baby's first cry. It's things that you know that you can't rearrange. So I pay as I go, and I don't count my change, 'cause it's all background scenery. That's all.
Speaking of being here, you're a relative newcomer to the northern confines of the Washington, D.C. area.
Yeah, we moved up here early September.
Yeah, it's. I guess I want to explain how we met, because it wasn't that long ago. You wandered into an open mic that we had and said, "Hey, you got a spot?" And I said, "Yeah." And I remember you guys played the last set.
It was a great night. It was the first. We've been to 3 or 4 open mics locally, and this was just far and away. I mean, it was a great venue, and it was just a great night. Everybody was on.
Everybody was on, and then
Darcy from the first
and
with
you
the
get
hammer
to the
dulcimer.
last, you guys come on, and nobody has, of course, laid eyes on you. And I do an introduction based on nothing at all, and you blew it away. It was just an amazing thing.
We came in under the radar. Everything was set up.
That was good.
It was a great time.
Good, yeah. You're doing all original material, obviously.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm mentioning the group, which is essentially sometimes you perform with.
Elizabeth Crisfield is my fiddle player and my partner, and we moved up together. We met in Homestead at actually a place where we both had gone to an open mic. Right. We started playing together about a year back.
How many songs in a year do you sort of feel you're turning out? In other words, and then and the other question would be, and how many actually hit the performing stage?
Really, if it's not good enough to hit the performing stage, then it doesn't finish. It just stays in pieces somewhere.
Goes away.
It doesn't go away. It'll probably come back in some incarnation of the lick or the melody or the thought, at least.
In influences, vocally, and I mean, I guess at one point you probably taught James Taylor how to sing.
I remember driving and hearing Fire and Rain on the radio and singing along to it. So, yeah.
And it just worked out that way. I mean, your voice is going to be in a certain range. And
Paul Simon, Cat Stevens,
the
younger days, and since I'm 2 years new to folk. I mean,
really?
I really heard about it 2 years ago. So,
wow.
Richard Shindell, Dave Carter, Tracy Grammer. I just heard Greg Brown, his live album, about when I was down in Florida about a week or so ago.
But enough about them. Let's go back to you. Let's see, the song you opened with, Background Scenery, would be the title?
Yes.
You can't fool me. But this is kind of neat for me as well, because a lot of times I come up with sort of, a shill, meaning I've known the person for years.
You never heard that song.
I never heard it. So, how about the next one? What's the next one about?
Next one is called Time to Go. It's about finding the right one.
Okay. All right. Well, take it away.
There's a universal dream. Maybe it's a myth. Maybe that's all myths are, shared dreams. This one goes like this. There's someone out there that we're meant to find, that we're supposed to be with. Someone we will know not by their look, but by their resonance to the best parts inside us. The missing hand, the soulmate. The song is for a woman who's not that soulmate. But she reminded me that I quit looking. Hey love, time to go and start my working day. Hey love, it's hard to put this waking dream away. When all is said and done, you are the only one I leave. Hey love, time to go and find my world again. Hey love, it's hard to leave and lose my closest friend. When all is said and done, you are the only one I leave. and all tomorrow holds turns on a single day. The calling of our souls is coming to me, coming to reach me this way, this way. Hey, love, time to say the words I never said. My love I might have shared, but kept inside instead. And all tomorrow holds is in this moment now. The calling of our souls is coming to me, coming to reach me somehow, somehow. Hey, love, time to go find my world again. Hey, love, it's hard to leave and lose my closest friend. When all is said and done, you are the only one I leave.